So imagine standing in a heavily guarded hospital ward.
Okay.
And there's this pediatrician, Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, and he has been locked up for over 500 days.
Oh, wow, 500 days.
Yeah. No charges have been filed, like no trial has been scheduled at all.
That's just wild.
It is. There's just this sealed file of confidential materials that is basically keeping him detained.
Right.
Now, zoom out from that hospital room, right? And pan over to this lavish, brightly lit summit room where U.S. and Iranian diplomats are shaking hands on a massive new peace framework. And this is all happening right as Donald Trump departs the G7 summit.
What's fascinating here is that it's a staggering juxtaposition.
Yeah, totally.
Because you have the highest levels of geopolitical theater operating under this assumption of control, right?
Right.
While the actual mechanics of peace and justice on the ground are completely fractured.
Exactly. And welcome to another custom-tailored deep dive built specifically for you, the learner.
So glad you're here with us.
I was going through our stack of sources for today, which is, it's a mix of dispatches from the New York Times and Democracy, now from June 17th and 18th, 2026.
A really interesting mix of reporting this week.
Definitely. And today's mission is to examine that exact disconnect you just mentioned. We're looking at the overarching theme of systems of power.
Right, because reading the news can sometimes feel like, well, looking at individual puzzle pieces through a microscope.
Yes, that's such a good way to put it. You just see the tiny details but miss the picture.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, how do we zoom out to see the whole picture of global stability today rather than just staring at, isolated crises?
Well, beneath the daily chaos of the news cycle, there are clear patterns, right?
Yeah.
The mechanics of how states exert power are shifting in real time.
Yeah.
We're seeing nations try to unilaterally engineer stability from the top down,
Mm-hmm.
while simultaneously and tragically exposing the massive blind spots in those very systems.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the first major piece of our puzzle is that handshake I mentioned earlier.
Right, the U.S. and Iran.
Yeah, reaching a framework agreement for peace. And the timing is just incredibly loud, dropping right as Trump leaves the G7.
Which definitely sends a massive signal about shifting diplomatic priorities.
For sure. But a framework agreement, I kind of tend to look at international diplomacy like releasing software in beta.
Oh, that's an interesting analogy.
Right. Because it's full of bugs, the code is fragile, but you have to launch it into the real world to see where it breaks before you can patch it with a truly binding treaty.
That is an apt way to look at it.
Yeah.
Because the quote-unquote bugs in this scenario are deeply entrenched regional conflicts.
Yeah, they're not just minor glitches.
Exactly. A framework is really just a declaration of intent. It outlines the parameters for de-escalation. And that's why markets reacted so quickly, anticipating, stabilized oil flow and lower fuel prices for everyday people.
But the moment you launch that beta software into the real world, it hits a wall.
It encounters the proxy dynamics. Because at the exact moment this framework is being touted globally, Israel has continued military actions in Lebanon.
Right, resulting in 4 deaths.
Yes, and Iran is explicitly accusing Israel of violating a truce.
So, wait, doesn't that invalidate the framework entirely? Does the sketch of a house even matter if the ground it's built on is actively shifting with truce violations and drone strikes?
It's a great question. It doesn't necessarily invalidate it, but it reveals the fundamental limitation of top-down diplomacy.
What do you mean?
Well, the framework operates at this macroeconomic, geopolitical level, securing shipping lanes, managing nuclear thresholds, that sort of thing. But the violence on the ground operates on immediate, tactical security imperatives.
Right, survival.
Exactly. Iran's accusation regarding the truce violation highlights just how fragile the architecture of peace is. A truce relies on perfectly synchronized restraint across dozens of decentralized militant groups and state defense forces.
So one wrong move.
One miscalculation or one preemptive strike, and it collapses the local architecture, even if the international diplomats are still smiling for the cameras.
And the cost of that local collapse is borne by the people trapped in the middle.
Always.
We saw this with the Democracy Now! Report on Hadi Hotate. He's a journalist who was hit by shrapnel from an Israeli drone strike in southern Lebanon.
And he survived. Thankfully.
He did, but it brings up the terrifying mechanics of modern warfare. Drone targeting is heavily reliant on heat signatures and pattern of life algorithms, but shrapnel is completely indiscriminate.
It doesn't care who you are.
Right. And when a journalist covering a conflict zone becomes collateral damage, it severely compromises the ability of the free press to accurately report on the realities of the ground war.
Absolutely. And, the injury to the journalist and the ongoing detention of Dr. Abu Safia, who you mentioned at the start.
Yeah, the pediatrician.
Right. They are symptoms of the same systemic issue. It's the suspension of standard civic protections during prolonged conflict. The Israeli Supreme Court just rejected Dr. Abu Safia's appeal, citing confidential materials.
Right, which brings up administrative detention. And before we dive into that, I just want to pause and make something crystal clear for you, the learner.
Good point, yes.
We are absolutely not taking sides here. The sources have a lot of politically charged content, and our goal is just to impartially report the facts. We're looking at the human rights concerns, like freedom of the press and due process, exactly as they are detailed in the source material.
Exactly. We are just conveying the ideas and events as reported.
Right. So with that in mind, explain how that legal mechanism actually works. Because holding a hospital director for over 500 days without a formal charge seems to just bypass the entire concept of the burden of proof.
Well, that is precisely what the mechanism is designed to do.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Yes.
In standard criminal law, the state must present evidence to the defense, right? So they can offer a rebuttal.
Yeah, that's basic due process.
But administrative detention allows a state security apparatus to convince a judge that an individual poses a future security threat based on classified intelligence. And neither the detainee nor their lawyer is permitted to see that intelligence.
Because it's confidential.
Exactly. The rationale is the protection of intelligence sources.
Okay, but the practical outcome of that is
An infinite loop of detention. The accused cannot defend themselves because they literally don't know the specific allegations. It places national security imperatives entirely above individual due process.
that is heavy. And that disconnect between the assumed precision of state power and the messy reality on the ground leads us directly into our next set of sources.
It does.
Because when a state utilizes its military or legal apparatus, the assumption is that their intelligence is flawless, right?
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting and tragically dark. In the Pacific, the U.S. military carried out a maritime strike on a boat, and the Pentagon later admitted that a past strike in the region may have killed victims of human trafficking.
Yeah, this forces us to examine the terrifying blind spots in algorithmic warfare.
How does that even happen, though?
Well, modern maritime strikes rely heavily on signals intelligence, so intercepted communications, radar anomalies, drone surveillance, tracking of vessels' movements to determine if it's hostile. But human trafficking networks operate in the exact same shadows. They use the same evasive transit routes as militant or piracy operations.
So the military's algorithm identifies a covert vessel, flags it as a threat based on its transit pattern, but the sensor has absolutely no way of knowing that the people locked in the hull are like modern-day slaves, not combatants.
Exactly the problem.
Yeah.
It is a catastrophic failure of precision.
Yeah.
When a state authorizes lethal force, it assumes a binary landscape. You're either a combatant or a non-combatant. But vulnerable populations, specifically trafficking victims, are rendered invisible to thermal imaging and radar.
It's just devastating.
It is. This Pentagon admission is a rare glimpse into the lethal consequences when high-tech military intelligence completely lacks qualitative humanitarian context.
It makes you really question the underlying design of these systems. And, this exertion of state power and its potential for unintended consequences isn't just a military issue overseas.
No, not at all.
It is playing out in the domestic legal system right now. In Minneapolis, 15 anti-IC activists who are protesting immigration crackdowns have been hit with federal conspiracy charges.
And we have to note, the leap from a local protest to a federal conspiracy charge is a massive escalation by the state.
I mean, conspiracy in a legal sense is a highly unique tool for prosecutors.
Right. It's incredibly potent.
But if they're coordinating an action that disrupts federal immigration operations, isn't planning to break the law a crime in itself? Like, why is a conspiracy charge considered an overreach by civil liberties advocates?
Because a conspiracy charge does not require the underlying crime to have actually been committed.
Wait, you don't even have to do the crime.
Nope. It only requires 2 or more people to agree to commit an unlawful act and for one of them to take a single overt step toward it.
And what counts as a step?
It could be as simple as buying a megaphone or sending an encrypted group text. Prosecutors often weaponize conspiracy charges against organized dissent because it drastically lowers the burden of proof.
Oh, wow. So they don't have to prove you blocked a federal facility. They just have to prove you talked about doing it and bought some supplies.
Exactly.
So it's essentially preemptive prosecution.
Yes, and it creates a massive chilling effect. It blurs the line between protected First Amendment assembly and criminal coordination.
I can see that.
Right. Because if the state can categorize the organizational logistics of a protest as a federal conspiracy, it fundamentally alters the risk calculus for any citizen who is just considering exercising their right to protest.
So at what point does a pattern of these unintended consequences, whether it's an algorithm mistaking trafficking victims for militants or a prosecutor using federal conspiracy laws to suppress local activists, demand a total redesign of how states wield their power?
Well, historically, state power structures do not redesign themselves.
Yeah, I guess they don't give up power easily.
No.
Mm.
They only recalibrate when they're forced to by overwhelming public friction. The primary directive of any state, whether it's dealing with maritime threats or domestic protests, is to maintain its own security and operational continuity.
Right, survival of the state.
Exactly. The friction arises because the mechanisms of accountability, like congressional oversight or judicial review, move at a glacial pace compared to the speed of a Hellfire missile or the filing of a federal indictment.
That instinct for state self-preservation, that drive to secure the perimeter at all costs, is driving some massive shifts in defensive posture globally right now, too.
Yes, shifting to Europe.
Yeah, let's look at Northern Europe. Finland has officially lifted its long-standing nuclear weapons ban to align its legislation with NATO allies.
And to really understand the gravity of this, you have to look at the mechanics of NATO's nuclear sharing doctrine. Finland shares an 830-mile border with Russia.
That is a massive border.
It is.
Yeah.
And for decades, their defense strategy relied on strict non-alignment to avoid provoking their neighbor. So joining NATO 3 years ago was a tectonic shift. Right.
But lifting the nuclear ban is the operational follow-through.
Because it's not just Finland building their own nuclear arsenal, right? It's about hosting them.
Correct. NATO's nuclear deterrence relies on the potential forward deployment of U.S. nuclear weapons on Allied soil.
Ah, I see.
By lifting this legislative ban, Finland is legally permitting the transit and potentially the stationing of nuclear assets inside their borders.
Which has to make Moscow nervous.
Extremely. From a strategic standpoint, placing nuclear capabilities that close to the Kola Peninsula, which houses Russia's own strategic nuclear fleet, drastically reduces the early warning timeline for Moscow.
From like, what, minutes to seconds?
Down to seconds, yes.
Yeah.
It is a profound escalation in deterrence. It's the ultimate geopolitical fence. But nations aren't only fortifying their borders, right? They're also fortifying their domestic markets against internal threats.
That's right.
Over in Japan, authorities have launched a massive raid against several major ice cream giants in a cartel investigation over suspected price fixing of frozen treats. Which, I mean, sounds a bit funny at first.
It sounds trivial compared to nuclear proliferation, definitely.
Yeah.
But the underlying economic mechanics are vital to a stable society. A cartel forms when ostensibly competing companies secretly collude to control a market.
Right.
In a healthy economy, price is determined by supply and demand. But in a cartel, the price is artificially dictated by a shadow agreement among executives.
But how do they actually pull that off without getting caught immediately? It's not like ice cream CEOs are meeting in a smoky back room, rubbing their hands together.
Right, no smoky back rooms.
Yeah.
Modern price fixing is incredibly sophisticated.
How so?
It often involves parallel pricing strategies. So one company announces a price hike, citing, supply chain costs.
Okay.
And the others immediately match it to the exact yen. They use distributors as intermediaries to ensure no one breaks rank. They carve up regional territories to avoid directly competing.
Wow, so it's a completely closed loop.
Exactly. It fundamentally destroys the market mechanism, effectively acting as an unauthorized tax on the consumer.
So what does this all mean? We have Finland altering the nuclear calculus of Northern Europe, while the Japanese Fair Trade Commission is acting as the neighborhood watch against corporate greed.
It's quite a contrast.
It is, but fundamentally, aren't both of these governments just exercising their mandate to enforce boundaries? I mean, one is protecting territorial integrity from foreign military aggression, and the other is protecting economic integrity from corporate greed.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you are hitting on the core definition of sovereignty.
Okay.
A state must maintain a monopoly on the legitimate use of force, and it must maintain the integrity of its economic markets.
Right.
If corporate conglomerates are allowed to manipulate prices with impunity, it erodes the public's trust in the basic fairness of the society, just as surely as a failure to defend a physical border would. Both are vital defensive postures designed to keep systemic chaos at bay.
It is a heavy realization. We've spent this deep dive analyzing systems that feel overwhelmingly large, right? Diplomatic frameworks that ignore local violence, military algorithms that kill the innocent, legal mechanisms that crush dissent, and corporate cartels that manipulate our daily lives.
It can definitely make the individual feel entirely powerless.
Totally. But our sources this week didn't end there, thankfully. They highlighted a fascinating counter-narrative about the resilience of the human spirit breaking through that heavy systemic noise.
And it is essential to study human narrative alongside institutional power, because human resilience is the only force capable of forcing those massive systems to recalibrate.
And sometimes that resilience looks undeniably stylish.
Yes, it really does.
The Democratic Republic of Congo's men's soccer team just qualified for the World Cup for the first time in 52 years, over half a century.
Such an amazing moment.
And they arrived on the global stage wearing these immaculate, sharp black suits with leopard print details. It was a direct homage to the saper fashion culture of the Congo.
Which is brilliant. The mechanics of La Sape, the society of ambiance makers and elegant people, is a fascinating sociological phenomenon.
I hadn't heard of it before this.
It originated in Brazzaville and Kinshasa as a direct visual rebellion against the indignities of colonialism and, later, post-colonial poverty.
So it's not just about looking good for the cameras.
Not at all. It is the radical assertion of dignity.
I love that.
By dressing in immaculately tailored, vibrant clothing amid challenging economic or political conditions, the supers are visually declaring that their self-worth is not dictated by their systemic circumstances.
Wow.
So for the national soccer team to adopt that aesthetic after a 52-year drought, it transforms a sporting achievement into a profound projection of cultural identity and joy on the world's largest broadcast. It unites a nation not through military might, but through shared cultural pride.
It's the perfect example of how an individual or a team can inject humanity back into a global system. And our final story operates on that exact same principle, but through the lens of deep physical vulnerability.
Yes, moving over to Norway.
Right. Crown Princess Mette-Marit of Norway recently underwent a lung transplant.
And the crucial detail here is how she navigated her illness publicly prior to the surgery. The Crown Princess continued to carry out her official royal duties while visibly wearing an oxygen tube.
The optics of that are so powerful. I mean, royalty is traditionally shrouded in this aura of perfection and untouchability.
Right, maintaining the illusion.
But by stepping out with an oxygen tube, she completely shattered that mystique. And the so what of this action is measurable and staggering. Her public vulnerability directly inspired a massive surge of thousands of Norwegians to sign up as organ donors.
It really highlights the mechanics of public health behavior. State health departments spend millions on campaigns urging citizens to register as organ donors.
And they usually have pretty marginal success, right?
Exactly, because the messaging comes from a faceless bureaucracy.
All right, it's just a billboard.
But when a highly visible figure strips away the hierarchy and exposes their own mortality, it triggers a parasocial empathy. It forces the public to confront the reality of organ failure, not as an abstract statistic, but as a deeply human crisis.
It's like a ripple effect.
Yes. Her vulnerability bypassed the bureaucratic friction and resulted in a tangible, massive surge in life-saving medical resources.
It's the ultimate proof that an individual's narrative can directly alter the metrics of a massive system. We've traced an incredible line today. We started by looking at the high-level beta software diplomacy of the U.S.-Iran framework, contrasting it with the grim reality of drone strikes and administrative detention in the Middle East.
And we examined the terrifying blind spots of state power, analyzing how military targeting algorithms fail victims of human trafficking, and how federal conspiracy charges are weaponized to chill domestic protest.
Then we tracked the defensive maneuvers of nations, from Finland fundamentally altering NATO's nuclear deterrence calculus to Japan actively dismantling corporate price-fixing cartels. And we grounded it all in the undeniable power of human narrative, from the Congolese soccer team's radical sartorial joy to a Norwegian royal's life-saving vulnerability.
This raises an important question for you, the learner. Analyzing the news is not about memorizing disparate events. It is about understanding the mechanics of the world you inhabit.
Absolutely.
How do these shifting systems of power, the legal frameworks, the military algorithms, the economic regulations, constrain or protect you? And more importantly, how does your individual resilience force those systems to adapt?
That is exactly what we want you to think about. I want to leave you with a thought to mull over as you go about your week. We just explored how a single royal, publicly displaying her medical struggle was able to fundamentally change her nation's public health metrics.
Yeah?
And we saw how a soccer team's 52-year journey could redefine a country's cultural footprint on the global stage. So if those visible acts of resilience can tangibly alter massive systems,
Uh-huh.
how much unseen positive influence do everyday people have in their own local communities that simply never makes the global headlines?
Yeah. It's a powerful thought.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We love pulling these threads and exploring these mechanisms with you. Keep questioning the systems around you, and we will catch you next time.